word.
Woohoo!
Yeah. So do you need me to share the screen? At your leisure, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
And I'm getting more and more contracts using this kind of format.
Yeah, well, this is so easy to do.
Yeah.
And, it's a way to reach people all around the country. I mean, you can only travel to so many places personally at one time.
No, I've done Skype, and I've done another platform called Blue Jeans and Zoom. By far, this is the easiest to navigate.
Yeah, I really like this. I was excited when we switched to this. And we've got the Zoom, what's it called, Zoom Pro or whatever, so we can, I think I could have up to 50 people. But the thing that we do is we allow somebody to register one computer. And then at that one computer, they can have as many people participate.
Right.
So one of our area education agencies is doing that.
That's great.
Yeah, so I really like, rather than the whole, it's all about collaboration, isn't it? So,
it is. That's the key.
And then are you gonna, which one of us needs to push the button to record? Oh, we're already recording. Okay. Well, I am going to start with an introduction of Dr. Jaime Castellano, who I've already referred to as a rock star in gifted education. Dr. Castellano is one of the nation's leading authorities on the identification, assessment, recruitment, and retention of low-income, culturally and linguistically different gifted students. His particular expertise and success is working with school districts across the nation to increase the number of Hispanic or Latino students, as well as Native American students and English language learners in the gifted education programs. He doesn't look old enough to have 25 years in the field, but he does. So more than 20 years in the field. He's been a teacher of the gifted, an assistant principal and principal supervising gifted ed programs, district level gifted education coordinator and director, and a state Department of Education specialist in the field. He has written some terrific publications, including books on this topic. And I know that many of you are planning to take the credit option that you can take that will start next week, that will build on Jaime's presentation today. So I hope that everybody enjoys. We have all of you muted. And so if you have a question today, if it's a question that's about something generic or the endorsement or the credit, you can send that directly to me. And the way you can chat is when you pull your mouse down toward the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat icon. And when you click on the little chat icon, you can choose that you send the email to everyone, or you can just send it to me. And if you have a question that you want to ask me, then feel free to send it to me. And I am going to try to keep track of the questions for Dr. Castellano today, and he can decide when he wants to answer those. So we'll get going now.
Okay.
And take off on identifying and serving gifted Latino kids.
First, let me say thank you to Lori. Appreciate the opportunity to, as I said before, spread the word. The University of Iowa, certainly, and the Bell and Blank Center for Gifted Education and Talent Development. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos. My name is Jaime Castellano, and I'm here to share some hopefully very relevant, real information so that you can help make the difference in the lives of many of our Hispanic and Latino students. You see here the outcomes for this webinar, and I am calling you advocates and champions because that is what we need in the schools. You are who we need on the front lines. You work with these kids every day. You're able to see their talent and their potential. And when we talk about outcomes in a professional development format of this nature, we're talking about outcomes that are real, right? and that are also rooted in research and practice. So hopefully this webinar will allow you to take the information that you receive and share it with your colleagues and implement it at the school level and at the classroom level where it can make the greatest difference. And as we do that, we also have to look at the whole child, and that means their social and emotional growth and development, their academic achievement, their cognitive ability, and at the same time, understand the complexities of their lives, where they come from, and the barriers that they often have to overcome to even be considered for advanced academic programming like gifted education. And in this talk, we'll also include that of English language learners, because very many of our Hispanic and Latino students also have the identity of being an English language learner. So these are the two outcomes for today's webinar. So first, we're going to take a look at a micro view of our Hispanic American population. So in the next slide, you will see a table that I'm going to ask you to complete. You'll have 5 minutes to complete the task, and it's titled Our Nation's Hispanic and Latino Mezcla, which is the Spanish word for mixture. And who do you know? Do the best you can. We're going to do this in real time, right, Lori? And so, are you guys ready? You got 5 minutes. Your time starts now. This is my effort to engage the audience in this kind of format. And Lori, please help me by being my timekeeper.
I'll let everybody know when the time is up.
Okay, appreciate it.
And they're still frozen, though. Okay, our time is up.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm confident that you guys did well on this type of an activity. And I call it a micro view of Hispanic Americans from a national perspective. And you see, I'm going to connect this in a couple of minutes to a micro level perspective. Um, and the thread that goes through both levels is that of building relationships and getting to know the Hispanic and Latino students in your programs. So I offer 3 discussion questions for your consideration. The first one speaks to your affect, right? How you felt about a completing activity of this nature. What was your level of comfort? And then certainly the implications for working with the students that you directly serve or that are part of the population and demographic of your school and or district. And then how you did on that type of macro view perspective and its relationship to the sense of identity of the Hispanic and Latino students in your schools and in your classrooms, right? So if you'd like to respond to these questions or add a comment, please make sure that you send them to Lori at your convenience. So we're going to go from the macro to the micro. And now we're going to make this a little personal as well, right? Because the assumption is that you are working directly with Hispanic or Latino students, whether they're identified for advanced academic programs like gifted education, or whether they are advanced or high ability in some regard. And if you don't service them directly, I'm sure they're in your schools and in your districts. So we're going to ask you a series of 10 questions, right? Beginning with the first one you see on the screen. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you know your Hispanic students? So ponder that for a few seconds, right? Because our American public school system is becoming more brown, with Hispanic and Latino students now representing 26% of all students. So that's tens of millions of students, and they're impacting certainly the large urban communities, the suburban communities, and the rural communities, even across Iowa, right? And so you guys ready to take this quiz? All right, let's do it. Number 1, which of your students would most likely have sofrito, a cooking sauce based on onions, green peppers, and garlic in their refrigerator? There you see the choices. Go ahead and make your selection. I'm going to move on. Number 2, which of your students leave the spicy chiles to other nations and often serve rice and black beans as a side dish? That does look yummy. It is around dinner time, right? And number 3, which of your Hispanic or Latino students is most likely to dance merengue and sancocho? There you have the choices. Give it your best guess. That looks good as well. Which of your students would celebrate Spanish holidays such as Conquest of the Moors? Which of your students may speak Spanish and Canjobal? And number 6, which of your students would serve tamales at a party, smash a piñata, and celebrate Cinco de Mayo? There you have the choices. Which of your students may have ancestors who were the first largest group of South Americans to arrive to the United States between 48 and 62? Which of your students may have ancestors who fled their country because of the Sandinista and their reign of terror? Which of your students is most familiar with pachucos, lowriders, and zoot suits? And finally, in number 10, which of your students may have relatives who took advantage of the wet foot, dry foot policy of the United States? Okay, so you guys ready for the answers? So I'm just going to go back real quick. We'll start from the beginning. All right, which of your students most likely have sofrito right there? The correct answer is C, Puerto Ricans. Regarding the black beans and rice, it's a staple of the Cubans. That is what you call sancocho. Okay, you can see plantains, you can see some roots in there. Looks very delicious. Sancocho, and those that dance merengue, Dominican. Los Dominicanos, A. Okay, celebrate Spanish holidays. That should have been a big key right there. And that would be A, the Spaniards. Students that speak both Spanish and Canjobal, that would be D, Guatemalans. Okay, I'm hoping everybody got this one correct. Okay, so that should be A, Mexican. Okay, the first group to come to the United States as a wave of people, that would be the Colombians. Number 8, the Sandinistas and their reign of terror, that would be Nicaragua, B. Okay, what you see there is a zoot suit, very popular among Mexican Americans, that's B. And then the wet foot, dry foot policy is most associated with the Cubans, C. Okay, so here's where they come from, ladies and gentlemen. Hispanic and Latinos represent 20 different ethnicities. And the common denominator for all 20 ethnicities is the Spanish language. Actually, it's 19 countries and 1 territory, that being Puerto Rico. And so we see these students in all our schools coast to coast, right? They represent all of the 20 different ethnicities. And in many schools, you'll have many of the different ethnicities in the same school. And so it's important that you understand the intra-ethnic diversity that exists among our Hispanic and Latino students. And so now I'm going to share with you are some characteristics typically associated with our Hispanic and Latino students, as well as those identified as English language learners. We're going to start with Project Bright Horizon, which was a Javits grant that I was fortunate enough to be one of the principal investigators and researchers. And part of that responsibility included working with the local school districts in the Phoenix, Maricopa County regional area to help identify more Hispanic, Latino students and English language learners, as well as other historically underrepresented groups, right? But when we focus on Hispanic and Latino students, and we talk about ELLs, these are some of the characteristics that we were able to come up with consistent with the research as we work directly with teachers and directly with students, going into classrooms, modeling instruction, promoting strategies and activities that would help those students show their talent and potential, right? And so you see a lot of this information here is rooted in language and culture, often referred to as the qualitative evidence that is often part of a characteristics checklist or comprehensive identification process for this particular group of students. You'll also see that some of these characteristics represent general characteristics of any child that is gifted or talented, right? We talk about grasping new information quickly, right? Creativity, advanced problem solving, and critical thinking skills, right? They're curious. So when we look at Project Bright Horizons, these are some of the characteristics that we saw consistently in our Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners time and time again, from schools within the district and throughout the metropolitan area. You can see the work by Brightest and Weinbrenner, also very consistent with what we found in Project Bright Horizons. And you see both what they call the soft skills as well as traditional characteristics, right? And so the point I'm trying to make with the characteristics is the fluency and the flow between the research out there on Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners, that there's a whole lot of overlap. And Bruyas and Weinbrenner helped us develop that sense of reliability when it comes to characteristics and what it looks like in this population of students. But then you look at, even going back to 1974, right, in 1999, these are both friends and colleagues of mine, Ernesto Bernal. He probably is the grandfather of gifted education when it comes to Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners. And my good friends, Nilda Aguirre and Norma Hernandez, with their project Gotcha, which was one of the first academic excellence projects as part of the U.S. Department of Education back in the day, in identifying historically underrepresented populations with the emphasis on English language learners. So you can see in both lists of characteristics, you see a heavy emphasis on qualitative components, right, that represent the environment, the culture, the way of life of this particular group of students. You see an eagerness to talk about the language, the culture, and their social interactions in the school and outside the school. Their ability to code switch, which is their ability to interpret at very high levels of accuracy, often for their parents and other relatives. When they learn a second language at an accelerated pace, the rapidity of which they acquire a new language is a key sign. I even see that right now with the Head Start programs I'm working with as part of some research. We see that even at that very young age, these kids are just soaking up the English language and are becoming very, very proficient in two languages. And we see that, and it's wonderful. And so the rapidity of which they acquire a new language is a key. And interestingly, when you look at the column of Bernal, you see that sense of being streetwise and recognized by others as being able to make it regardless of the audience or the environment or the group of people that they're associating with. They have what it takes to be successful regardless of the environment. And that's certainly one of the characteristics that we look at when we talk about identifying and serving Hispanic and Latino students as well as English language learners. So what I tried to do in the last 3 to 5 minutes was just to give you a sense of how these characteristics may manifest themselves in your Hispanic and Latino students in the schools and the districts that you serve. So now we get to make it a little more personal by doing some values voting, right? So with this particular activity, you vote to agree, you vote to disagree, or you vote, look, I'm just not sure. And here's the prompt. My school district does a good job in identifying gifted, advanced, and high ability, low income, racially, culturally, and linguistically diverse students, right? So the reason they call it values voting is because how you interpret this prompt, it has to be personal, right? This has to reflect your beliefs, your values, and your attitudes. And because this is a webinar format, your other district folks and administrators are not there to see how you vote, right? So be true to yourself and be honest to yourself and how you answer this particular prompt. I would say that if you vote, I disagree, my school or district does not do a good job, then perhaps that serves as the catalyst to begin a courageous conversation with first the folks in your school, whether it be your grade level colleagues, the teachers you share or see in the lunchroom, or your administrators, right? Having in that conversation, if you have that demographic in your school, if those students are there every day and you see the talent and you see the potential, then as I stated in my opening comments, you have to be a champion for these students. You have to be a soldier. You have to be an advocate for them. You have to be their voice at this point, right? Again, if you have any comments or questions regarding this particular audience poll, feel free to text Lori a comment or a question or a response. All right, let's move on. The next audience poll asks, overall, our school district applies research and practice that are responsive to the unique needs of Hispanic and Latino gifted learners, including those identified as English language learners, right? So now we're talking about the research and the practice and how you bridge the two and how it represents itself in the classrooms when you're working directly with these students. So we know that one of the gold standards in education, in curriculum instruction, is being able to apply research. Does your school, does your district take the best of what's out there, reflect on it, discuss it, review it, and apply it with this population of students? It's important because once we identify our Hispanic and Latino students, the next challenge is trying to get them in the program. Okay, just because they're eligible does not necessarily mean they're going to get in or they want to be there. So what do you do to recruit those kids? And once you do have them sign up, as it were, what do you do to retain them in your schools and in your districts? And this question, this prompt, helps you begin having that conversation about how the research applies to these subgroups of kids in our schools and in our districts. Because at the end of the day, it's about you, the teachers in the classroom, and it's about the building and district leadership being able to establish an infrastructure that's going to support not only you as the teacher, leader in your school, as the champion and advocate for this population, but for all of the primary stakeholders, right? Creating that infrastructure that is rooted in research and practice, and where the thread is seamless from the superintendent on down or from the classroom on up. It's important that we have this type of conversation and discourse. So let's talk about equity, access, and opportunity. So we look at two different programs, right? Special education and advanced academic programs. Now, I know in the state of Florida, from where I live, many of our programs for gifted education fall under the umbrella of advanced academic programs, which also typically includes honors programs, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate type programs, right? But first, let's look over at special ed. Okay, we're talking about Hispanic and Latino students, English language learners, and I would say that over the past 2 years, there has been a lot of counterpoint type research when it comes to disproportionality in special ed for Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners. And the two areas that are getting the most press, the most research, and where the debate is the greatest is in the area of speech and language and learning disabilities, right? Depending on who you read or the statistics that you have access to, some would say, no, they're not underrepresented. Others would say, yes, they are underrepresented. And a unifying comment that both sides are making is that, look, it's often contextual. And we have to look at what's happening at the local level to help determine whether there's issues of disproportionality in special education. When it comes to behavior disorders and intellectual disabilities, no. Hispanic Latino students are not overrepresented. But let's look at the flip side now. Advanced academic programs. And it's yes, 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 yes. Grossly underrepresented. And all the research attests to this. And even those of us that are practitioners, researchers, scholars, authors, working at the universities in teacher preparation programs, which include gifted education. Everyone, it's a consensus. They're all underrepresented in advanced academic programs. This despite 25 years of Javits Grant research and programs. Now there are lighthouses, throughout the country that does a good job in identifying and serving Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners. I was doing it in my schools when I was a principal since back in 1995. So, the programs that I offered when I was a principal were some of the first, not only in the state of Florida, but in the nation. And so I'm very proud of that. And as much as I try personally to be a champion and to advocate for our Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners, it takes an army of us, okay, to advocate. So I'm glad you're part of this webinar and you're taking the time out of your busy schedules and away from your family to get a better understanding of the importance of impacting this population and identifying and serving more of them in our advanced academic programs. So there are definitely issues of equity in gifted education for us. Here's an example, right? Here's the data. Okay, in basketball, they say ball don't lie. Here, data don't lie. There it is. This is from the Office from Civil Rights, right? So we could see the overall enrollment in school districts that are offering gifted and talented education, because not every public school in America does. But those that do, here you see the racial and ethnic breakdown. And then you look on the right-hand column with the actual number of students who are participating in those programs. It's very telling, right? You see Hispanic students are underrepresented, as well as our African-American students are underrepresented. So we need you to help change this data. I wrote an article for the Special Populations Network of the National Association for Gifted Children, NAGC. And in doing my research, I went back 50 years, 5 decades, okay, starting from the 1970s. And depending on who you talk to or what you read, some would argue that the open era of gifted education probably started in the 70s, right? So the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, now we're in the 2010, spanning 50 years, still underrepresented despite having pumped millions and millions of dollars into gifted education, scholars writing about it, trainers and coaches, providing staff development. We're still behind. But I like to think that the glass is half full, right? And so there's opportunity out there for us to make a difference. And so part of that difference is us as adults engaging in professional growth and development on this very unique subject, right? And I'm proposing that when we look at professional growth and development and trying to identify and serve Hispanic and Latino students, as well as those identified as English language learners, teachers and administrators, leaders in gifted education, in regular education, in bilingual education, in ESL, in special education, because we have very many twice exceptional students that are Hispanic and Latino, that part of that professional growth and development must include multicultural education and cultural competency, right? It has to be both. Here's why. Okay, so when we talk about multicultural education, we're basically talking about them, trying to learn more about the students that we're working with that are part of the demographic of our school. I want to learn more about this group of students, so I'm going to engage in some reading, in some conversation, in some discourse, attend workshops, get training. I'm going to do some reading on multicultural education because I want to learn about them as a group of people and their cultural backgrounds, right? That's important. It lays the foundation. But it also must include cultural competency as a parallel pathway. So when we talk about cultural competency, the emphasis is on self and understanding who we are and the challenges that we may have in working with students who are different from us socioeconomically, socially, emotionally, racially, culturally, linguistically. And I have to be able to reconcile these behaviors, these attitudes, and these values that I have first so that I can begin to make a difference with the students that I work with, right? So I have to be able to understand myself before I can best understand others. And so let's delve into it just a little bit more, right? So we're talking about personal bias. And we all have it, don't deny it, we all do. And so that makes this very personal, right? But, when we talk about the impact that we would have on the lives of Hispanic and Latino students, I think engaging in a professional dialogue with our colleagues on these types of topics and conversations is important. And in the long run makes us not only better teachers, but better human beings as well, right? So we have to examine our own biases and our own cultural values and how they often, limit us or create more challenges in the day-to-day interactions we have with either students or others that are different from us, right? And so it affects everyone. So we're going to be looking at 5 different areas, right, when we talk about cultural competency and the implications to our Hispanic and Latino students. Certainly we talk about awareness and acceptance. You see the 5 there. We're going to go through them. And again, if you have any notes, any questions, any comments, please feel free to share them with Lori at your convenience. But number 5 is where we want to get to, right? We want to be able to adapt to diversity, not only personally, but institutionally. And let's see how we get there. Okay, so you know what? Look at that first bullet. Some of us that just don't get it, right? And I think we're seeing that play out across our country in reference to a presidential election and the challenges that many of us are having as American citizens with accepting others who are different from us, right? And so it has a trickle down effect all the way to the classroom level and to the daily lives of the students that walk to and from your school to home and the community in between. So when you have someone who is simply unwilling to understand that we are stronger together as opposed to divided, they learned that somewhere along the way. And they are so strong in their convictions that they can't see the forest from the trees, right? And so very few of us this happens to. The vast majority of us, thank goodness, are able to understand that there are differences and we must be aware of those differences, and we should be able to embrace that diversity that exists not only in our community but in our schools as the public schools become more brown. So we look at two, self-awareness, and earlier I mentioned, as an individual and institutionally, we have to increase that level of self-awareness. But you have to be a willing participant in these conversations. You have to be ready to engage in these conversations where there may be a level of discomfort, where you may be revealing some personal information for the first time, right? But part of the process tells us that as a result of that type of disclosure, you become a stronger person who in turn becomes a stronger advocate for our Hispanic and Latino students. And what's very interesting is the role of family and how family influences one's perception of those who were different from us or are different from us. I can tell you personally that my father was a racist. There was no question about it. And as a young man growing up in Chicago, I was offended that I had a family member that believed how they did about other groups of people. So that helped me better understand myself and how I didn't want to be as I grew up into adulthood, right? Knowing that I wanted to be able to be aware of and appreciate differences. And I certainly saw that when I went to college, where it was culture shock for me, right? But I was willing to, make the effort and be part of a higher education experience with others that were different from me. In reflection, I laugh now, like saying, I've never seen so many white people in my life, until I went to the university. Being from the barrios of the south side of Chicago, having never left my community, then all of a sudden being thrust into a major Midwestern university, about 20,000 students, basically all white. It was culture shock, but I had the fortitude, thank goodness, to stick it through and understand others that were different from me. In a dorm floor of 50 guys, 49 white guys and me. Very interesting dynamic back in the day. And so as a result of these types of experiences, they influence our outlook on life. But the point is that our sense of self-awareness must be parallel, both personally and institutionally. You have to understand differences. And so then I posed the question to all the participants listening and to my friends sitting there in the Bell and Blank Center. Do you understand the daily life experiences of the Hispanic and Latino students that you serve or that you see or that are part of your schools, your districts, your universities? And do you understand that influences who they are and what they can become, right? So it's very important for us as teachers to understand the difference that poverty makes in the lives of the students that you serve. It's important that you understand that many of the families that you serve live in fear because they are different, because they don't speak the English language. They're different because they're undocumented, don't have papers. Do you understand that about the Hispanic and Latino community that you serve? When we look at the high schools and the college, we talk about the dreamers, the tens of thousands of Hispanic and Latino students with so much talent and potential, truly gifted, but cannot gain access to higher education because they are not legal citizens of the United States and are not allowed to get access to much of the financial aid. But thankfully, there are many local individual institutions who are saying, we're going to support the dreamers, we will help them financially. And so you have to understand that they come to you with these differences. And do you understand that? Because if you understand that, then that makes you an advocate for those students. And in terms of the relationship with your students, their families, and the communities, you'll have them in the palm of your hand because they'll grow to love you and respect you. And they'll know that you're there for them and with them, right? So integration of cultural knowledge. So yeah, we learned all this stuff in our professional growth and development in multicultural education and in cultural competency. Now, how do I apply it? Okay, in terms of my cross-cultural communication and understanding with the students that I work with and the kind of relationships I build with them and how I invite parents into the circle. Because if you want to actualize the potential of our Hispanic and Latino students and our English language learners that are gifted, advanced, and high ability, you're going to have to form collaborations and partnerships with their parents and families, right? And with Hispanic and Latino families, it's often an extended family. And so you have to realize that. That's part of the difference that we talked about earlier, right? And then, of course, we want to adapt to diversity. We want to be able to make that difference. We want to be able to become culturally proficient, culturally competent. We want to be able to be successful in our interactions and in our relationships with our Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners, with their parents and with their families and with their extended families, right? When we talk about adapting to diversity, we're talking about certainly similarities and differences, but the emphasis is on similarities, right? And accepting the differences. They are different. To deny that they're not different would be denying who they are, right? So often I work with colleagues from across the country, primarily practitioners, educators, teachers, K-12, and in their effort to demonstrate what they believe is their adaptation to diversity, they will tell me, look, when those kids walk into my classroom, I don't see color and I don't see poverty. I treat them all the same. And then now I slap my own head. What? Are you blind? Okay, how can you not see the color of their skin? Don't you understand that this is a Title I school and they come from poverty? Okay, their last name is Ramirez and they speak limited English. Okay, to deny those facts are to deny those kids sense of self and sense of identity. And that's all part of this adaptation to diversity, right? The willingness to understand that and to apply what you learn in understanding these groups of students that we're working with day in and day out. So we're going to move from that conversation to now talk about instructional pedagogy, as well as what I refer to as relational pedagogy, because, man, it is about building relationships with your students. So what you're going to see here in the next few slides are things that we can do in the classroom that would help accommodate the talent and potential of our Hispanic and Latino students, as well as those English language learners, right? You see, the key there is make instructional developmental and flexible. Well, guess what? We see that with all gifted kids, not just Hispanic and Latino students. The point is that I wanted to include these universally accepted practices and help you understand how they apply and how they manifest themselves with our Hispanic and Latino students and English language learners. We know that when we identify Hispanic and Latino students, as well as English language learners, many schools and many districts use alternative assessments for those students to gain eligibility status, right? Most typically, it's a nonverbal measure of their intelligence. And a few that come to mind off the top of my head would be the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test, the Standard Ravens Progressive Matrices, the COGAT Nonverbal Section, right? So those kids would gain eligibility through those nonverbal measures, which is fine, right? Alternative pathways. The guidelines and policies in many of our states allow for that to occur. And so the challenge, however, at the practitioner level is those kids have been identified through nonverbal means, but they're put in a verbally intensive, language-rich environment. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but it creates a mismatch often. And teachers of the gifted often come back and say, wait a minute, how did this kid get into the gifted program? They can't even do the work that I'm providing them. Well, it's because it's a programmatic mismatch. If we are to accommodate our Hispanic and Latino students, as well as our English language learners, then curriculum and instruction should in fact be developmental and flexible, knowing that many of those kids come to us with gaps in their basic skills as well, right? I've seen it all across the country. That does not mean, however, that those students cannot think critically or problem solve. That's a myth. And so, you know, one size does not fit all. You have to take into effect student interests, student readiness levels, their passion areas, and another number of qualitative characteristics and criteria. So the key here, though, is instruction is developmental and flexible. There's equity again, right? So I'm thinking to myself, this is where differentiation comes in, right? So we certainly want to be true to academic standards. Absolutely, there's no question about it. I think everyone in gifted education would concur that it would be a consensus that, yeah, you know, there has to be some curricular standards and benchmarks. In many states, it's the Common Core state standards, and in some states, it's not. But the important thing to remember is that there is a set of standards and benchmarks to refer to. And it's differentiation that allows students to access successfully what those standards and what those benchmarks are. Now we know that differentiation is a staple in gifted education. That's the expectation. And so even though these students have been deemed eligible through nonverbal measures, through differentiation and through experiences, teachers are able to tap the strengths of those students and help them realize their talent and potential. And when we talk about how we involve parents, you have to use a language that is relevant and understandable to them. So if we're talking about Hispanic and Latino students, English language learners, if your school has interpreters, that would be a great thing to do. And so now we talk about helping build those relationships with students, realizing what their talents, what their strengths are, and understanding how their language, their culture, their ethnicity interweaves with their high academic standing and their cognitive ability. So often for them to engage in experiences that are meaningful, okay, I have to rely on what's in the community that I can access. Are there any landmarks? Are there any resources? Are there any services in the community that will allow me to help build these students in terms of their achievement, in terms of their cognition, in terms of building relationships, in terms of access to other opportunities in the community? So we're talking about accessing potential and giving those students the experiences and the opportunities to demonstrate that talent. And sometimes we got kids that are so bright that we talk about acceleration. Oh, there's a bell and blank thing, right? Acceleration. And so that's cool because I sat on that committee with Nick and the crew and helped develop those policy recommendations for our nation. And that's a real good document, by the way. Oh, you guys should check it out. But if you're in Iowa, I'm sure you already have it, right? But the point is that content acceleration and grade skipping should be made available to those students who would benefit from it. I know that as a building principal, as a district coordinator and a district director, it was a common practice where I was at, knowing that that would be most beneficial to the students. But understand that when we were dealing with Hispanic and Latino students, we often brought those parents in, or we went to them to explain what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it. And in every case, parents agreed that they would allow their child to be content accelerated or grade skipped. Again, that's an option for all students, not just some students. Okay, so yeah, when we talk about those experiences, we always want to make sure that there's an emphasis on rigor, and that there's an emphasis on relationships, and tapping into what the students want to talk about, what the common good is. So you are promoting principles of democracy, which is what our nation is rooted in, right? Democracy. And you want to make sure that those instructional activities, experiences that you offer your students are going to impact the whole child, right? Not only should they be able to demonstrate academically and cognitively what they know and are able to do, but how does those experiences that you offer these kids impact their social emotional growth and development? So when we talk about educating the whole child, those are 4 primary elements that are core to making sure that we want to get the best we can from these students, and looking to the needs of the whole child allows us to do that. And there's a lot of literature out there in both gifted education and in regular education that talk about social emotional growth and development. I believe George Betts, who is the president of NAGC, has made that a national priority of the association and in gifted education, to look at the whole child so that the social and emotional factor is not forgotten. Okay, so we all always want to know what these kids already know, right? Isn't that part of curriculum compacting and differentiation and understanding and getting to know our students? So some would say that Hispanic and Latino students would bring a perspective and an outlook to the world and to the community that, let's say, their Caucasian or African American classmates don't have. And so one way to help understand that is to find out what they already know. You see that word flexibility again, as well as being allowing them rather to learn at different rates, where the emphasis would be maybe on pace, complexity, or depth, right? All words that you've heard before as part of your gifted education training and what you do currently in your classrooms, in your schools, and in your districts. Focus on their interests, on their passions, and that'll take you a long way. So we talk about relational pedagogy, and the hope is that we all are caring and loving teachers. When we talk about educating the whole child, one of the components is that they would be taught by highly qualified and caring teachers. Now, highly qualified and caring, depending on how you talk to it, could be qualitatively debated, right? But when we talk about caring teachers, what does that mean to you? In working with students that are not like you, that may not even be able to speak the English language very well. And so what does a caring teacher look like and sound like when they're working with historically underrepresented populations in advanced academic programs like gifted education, right? What does that mean to be a caring teacher? And if we were to walk into your classrooms, if we were to walk into your schools, if we were to walk into your district office or your university offices, would there be evidence that shows that you embrace and celebrate diversity? I know that when I was a principal of a barrio school in West Palm Beach, Florida, we had approximately 14 of the 20 Hispanic ethnicities enrolled in my school. So when the parents came into our front office, we decorated the periphery of all around the office with the flags of those 14 Hispanic nations and territories, right? And so that was a small example of evidence that we embraced and that we valued who they were and where they come from. Because with Hispanic and Latino students, you'll find that country of origin is very important. And when we talk about how well do you know your Hispanic students, we're all not Mexicans or Puerto Ricans, right? There's 20 different ethnicities. And so you have to know that about the students that you work with. And certainly you see that last bullet there, teachers with ganas. Ganas is the Spanish word for desire. When we talk about teachers with ganas, we're talking about teachers that want to be there, that want to work with Hispanic and Latino students, English language learners that are gifted, advanced, and high ability. A lot of times, teachers with ganas understand that they're going to have to teach and reteach skills and practices that their Caucasian classmates already have, right? So when we talk about a teacher with ganas, they understand that and they want to help make that difference in the lives of those kids. They have that desire, right? They have those ganas. And so as we come to the end of this webinar, I did want to share what I thought was a cute cartoon, right? If you're ever familiar with Baldo, Baldo is a comic that you find in most major newspapers across the country in the comic section. And Baldo is the story of a Hispanic family, Mexican American. And this is about Gracie, who herself is a gifted and talented young Latina student, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and let you read the comic on your own. I hope you liked that cartoon. I thought it was cute. Made a great point, I thought. Okay, so Lori, I guess we open up for questions, or how do you want to play this?
I have a great question. By the way, I love the cartoons. I thought they were awesome.
Thanks.
I did. I unmuted. Josh was just asking me if I'd actually remembered to unmute, and I did. So the first really good question we have, and by the way, after I ask this one, I don't really see anything wrong with if you have a question, you can go in and also unmute yourself and just ask Jaime the question. But the question that was submitted is, how do we effectively advocate for the acknowledgement of these differences without being told by peers that we are making excuses for the students?
I think an appropriate response there would be to be true to the expectations of the program. And we know that when we talk about being true to a gifted education program, we talk about a high academic level, advanced cognitive levels. And part of the answer is going back to understanding and embracing diversity and the strengths that these students have. If you tap into their interests, if you tap into their learning styles, if you tap into their achievement styles, then I would say that those students will be able to compete with all other students in the program that were not Hispanic or Latino or ELL. Differentiation would allow us to do that, to help students demonstrate what they know and are able to do while being true to those content standards and the performance objectives that the teachers create.
You know, one of the things that a couple of people have contributed is just the shortage of diverse teachers in schools today, and what do we do about that? And then one of our participants said we are also short of interpreters for the many languages we have in our school, and that does make it harder to communicate with parents.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, finding interpreters who speak the language of the community. But the community is also the best place to start, because I'm sure that of the families that are represented there, there's going to be a few that may step forward, would be willing to step forward and to help you advocate for the students that you serve. Now, in terms of the diversity of teachers of the gifted, or just in general, let me throw out a couple of statistics for you, because that's part of the research I'm doing now. So the latest research tells us that 82% of all teachers in America are white. 82%. 8% are Hispanic or Latino. And of the 8%, I think 2.5% are males. 7% of all teachers in America are African American. And of that 7%, 2% are males. And there's about 1% Native American teachers and about 1% Asian teachers. So you're right, there's no question about it, but I do know that one of the final documents from the Obama administration was a strategic plan on on what districts could do to recruit a more diverse teaching force. But of course, the current administration has put a hold on many of the policies that were made from the previous administration. So the hope is that districts on their own will go to recruitment fairs at universities that primarily serve Hispanic and Latino students with a teacher education program, or historically Black colleges and universities that have a teacher preparation program as part of the pipeline to your districts.
Yeah, that is important. Who else has a question while you still have access to Dr. Castellano's wisdom?
Lori,
If the price is right, no, play it.
Lori, can you hear me from Burlington? This is Doreen. I don't know.
Hi, Doreen. Yes, I can hear you.
Oh. We would like to go back to that question about culture. I think in our neck of the woods, we don't have that culture of embracing diversity. There is still this idea of us versus them, kind of. And so what we were trying to get at in our question was, we're trying to advocate about looking at local norms for our Hispanic students, but then how do you confront the administration or even the community when they say, well, how come my kids' scores are like those kids' scores? How come you're serving those kids versus my kids? Does that make?
It does. I hear that all the time. And so I would ask in return, what is the district's or the school's commitment to equity, access, and opportunity in terms of making sure that all students have access to your programs? One of the most efficient and nationally recognized ways, promoted by the U.S. Department of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, and a host of other organizations, including NAGC, is to create local norms, because we know that there are talented students in every subgroup of students. And if you want to identify who your top 5 or 10%, let's say, of your Hispanic and Latino students are, and once you identify who those kids were, you go to those teachers and say, or those teachers will tell you that these kids are different from their peers. They do stand out. And so that itself is reason enough to give those kids a different program. And when you accommodate those students, and what I mean by accommodate, I mean you understand that they are coming to you perhaps from a Title I school, coming to you perhaps with knowing or speaking another language. The question then becomes, how do the teachers in that program and the teachers in that district create opportunities for those kids to be successful? And so one of the ways that you can begin making some inroads is by focusing on what we call those surface elements of culture, right? That's an invitation to diversity to your non-Hispanic community. When we talk about, let's create an event where perhaps children are going to perform, which is the draw for parents. That would be one way for you to at least begin with the awareness and exposure stage with your students and your families and in your community. But when it comes to your gifted, advanced, and high ability students, hand selecting the teacher that's going to work with those kids would be key. We talked about earlier teachers with ganas. teachers with the desire to work with that population and to help make a difference. We talked about how the infrastructure in your school and in your district is built to support those teachers and those students. Do you have the resources and the materials and the wherewithal to give those things to that teacher so that they can be successful? Giving the opportunity to that teacher, to that team of teachers to try, and if they fail, that's an opportunity for growth, right? And so just keep on trying again and again and again to show your non-Hispanic or community or those that are them, you show them, hey, these kids are as good as any other student. And here's my evidence.
I know, Doreen, that is a really tricky situation though, and it's really not too dissimilar from people who object to students with disabilities receiving accommodations on tests like the ACT, because there was so much suspicion for a long time that, well, if they get extended time, of course they're going to do better. If you give my kids extended time, they'll do better. But the research showed that extended time didn't help anybody else do any better except the kids who needed those accommodations. But that's the battle that you're fighting. So, you know, you can share best practices, and it just may take a while for it to really sink in.
And then plus, if you search the internet, even in a couple of my books, I do have checklists and very relevant questions that speak to attitudes and values of people in the district and in the community. I asked them to look at data. I asked them to look at the teachers of the gifted in the program and to assess their values and beliefs. And so these are simply open-ended questions that get conversations started. So, you know, if those other ideas may prove to be too much of a challenge, then I would simply begin with an honest, courageous conversation with the folks in the room.
That's super. Anybody else? Well, Jaime, I know that that everybody who's here today knows how to get in touch with me. And so, I mean, your email address is still up there, but if you've managed to lose the jaime.castellano@yahoo.com, you can certainly send me a question and I will forward it on and share an answer with you. But we all want to thank you so much. This was just great. We appreciate it.
I can't believe time is already up.
I know, it just flew by. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good luck, everybody. Please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you, Lori. Bless you. Everybody have a good night.